In the pre-dawn darkness of June 1st, 2026, a handful of scientists from the U.S. Geological Survey's Hawaiian Volcano Observatory scrambled up to the Wekahuna overlook inside Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, watching monitoring instruments that told them something was about to happen at the summit of Kilauea. By the time they arrived, roughly 20 minutes after the activity began, the Halemaʻumaʻu crater's north vent already had a lava fountain rising more than 330 feet into the pre-sunrise sky. Within the hour, that fountain had climbed even higher, ultimately reaching an estimated 650 feet, roaring for 9 straight hours before finally subsiding. That single morning, officially logged as episode 48 of Kilauea's ongoing eruption, didn't just produce another dramatic photograph for the observatory's collection. It broke a record that had stood essentially untouched for 40 years. I need you to understand exactly what record this was, because it's more specific and honestly more interesting than a vague biggest eruption ever headline would suggest. Episode 48 marked the 48th distinct fountaining episode of the eruption that began at Kilauea's summit on December 23, 2024. And in doing so, it surpassed the 47 fountaining episodes produced during the opening years of the Puʻuʻōʻō eruption, back between 1983 and 1986. That earlier eruption went on to become one of the most famous and long-lived in Kilauea's modern history, but its opening burst of fountaining activity, the specific comparison this year's eruption just outdid, had stood as the benchmark for 4 full decades. Katie Mulliken, a geologist and spokesperson with the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, confirmed the record directly, and since that June morning, the volcano hasn't shown any real sign of stopping. As of this week, Kilauea has now produced 53 separate fountaining episodes, with observatory scientists saying the specific pattern of ground deformation recorded right after the most recent one, and it strongly suggests episode 54 is already on its way. So today we're going to walk through exactly how this eruption has unfolded, what actually makes an eruption episodic in the first place, why this specific pattern has now outlasted a benchmark set 40 years ago, what the most recent activity looked like just yesterday, and what scientists are watching for as this remarkable sustained eruption continues. Let's start with the basic shape of this eruption, because understanding its rhythm is essential to understanding why it's been able to rack up so many individual episodes. Kilauea's current summit eruption began within the Halemaumau crater on December 23, 2024, and rather than producing one continuous outpouring of lava, it has instead settled into a genuinely distinctive pulsing pattern. A fountaining episode begins, typically lasting somewhere between a few hours and just under 12 hours, and then it stops, sometimes abruptly, giving way to a pause that can run anywhere from several days to more than 2 weeks before the next episode begins. Scientists studying this pattern have compared the underlying mechanism to a shaken bottle of soda. The magma feeding this eruption is unusually rich in dissolved volcanic gas, and as that magma rises toward the surface, the gas begins separating out and expanding, exactly the way carbon dioxide fizzes out of a soda bottle once the pressure holding it in solution is released. That gas-driven fizzing is what produces the dramatic, towering fountains this eruption has become known for. And once a given batch of gas-rich magma has largely worked its way through the system, the fountaining stops and the volcano effectively pauses to build pressure again before the next episode begins. Averaged out across the full run of this eruption, these 53 episodes have occurred roughly once every 11 days since the eruption began, which means that on any given day you might pick at random to visit the summit, the volcano is statistically more likely to be paused than actively fountain. That's a genuinely useful detail if you're the kind of person considering a trip specifically to see this eruption in person. And we'll come back to exactly how to check the current status before you go. Let's walk through some of the specific standout episodes that have defined this eruption's remarkable run through 2026, because the individual numbers genuinely tell a story of their own. Episode 35, occurring earlier in the sequence, produced the tallest lava fountains recorded anywhere during this entire eruption, reaching an extraordinary height of roughly 1,500 feet. A figure that puts it among the tallest lava fountains ever documented anywhere on Earth, let alone at Kilauea specifically. Episode 40, which struck on January 12, 2026, marked the first fountaining episode of the new year, after a pause stretching back to the very start of January, running for just under 10 hours and reaching fountain heights of roughly 800 feet, tall enough that tephra, small fragments of volcanic glass carried aloft in the eruption plume, drifted far enough to lightly dust the public viewing area at Wekahuna. Episode 42, wrapped up on February 15th after nearly 10 hours of continuous fountaining. Episode 47, on May 14th, produced fountains reaching roughly 656 feet, viewed by crowds gathered at the Kanakakoi overlook. And then came episode 48 on June 1st. The record breaker itself followed less than a month later by episode 50 on June 27th, which ran for 7 hours and reached fountains up to 984 feet, nearly the height of Seattle's Space Needle, stacked on top of itself twice over. That brings us to the most recent activity, and this is genuinely happening right now as far as this story is concerned. Episode 53 began at approximately 3:45 in the afternoon Hawaiian Standard Time on August 12th and continued for 9.6 hours before ending abruptly at 1:23 in the morning on August 13th. Through the evening, the fountain gradually diminished, dropping to around 300 feet by around midnight, with the eruption plume's height falling to roughly 10,000 feet at the same time. In the final half hour before the episode ended, fountain heights had dropped further still, down to somewhere between 100 and 200 feet, before the activity stopped entirely. Here's the detail that actually matters most for understanding where this eruption goes. From here, immediately after episode 53 ended, the ground beneath the summit switched abruptly from deflating, the pattern typically seen while magma is actively erupting out of the system, to inflating, the pattern typically seen while the underlying magma reservoir is refilling in preparation for the next episode. Observatory scientists have been direct that this specific switch from deflation to inflation, right at the moment an episode ends, is itself a strong signal that another fountaining episode is likely coming. That deflation to inflation cycle is actually the core scientific tool researchers use to anticipate when the next episode might begin, and it's worth understanding briefly because it's a genuinely elegant piece of applied volcano monitoring. The Hawaiian Volcano Observatory maintains a dense network of tilt meters and GPS stations around Kīlauea's summit, instruments sensitive enough to detect the ground itself, gently rising and falling by fractions of an inch as magma moves in and out of the shallow reservoir beneath the crater. During a fountaining episode, that reservoir is actively draining as magma erupts out through the vent, and the ground measurably deflates as a result. Once the episode ends, the reservoir begins slowly refilling from depth, and the ground begins measurably inflating again. Scientists track that inflation closely, because in this specific eruption's pattern, once the ground has reinflated to roughly the same level it reached before the previous episode began, that's historically been a strong indicator that the system has rebuilt enough pressure to produce another fountaining episode relatively soon. It's not a perfect guaranteed predictor down to the exact hour, but it's given the observatory a genuinely useful early warning tool for anticipating roughly when the next episode is likely to occur, which is part of why they were able to state with real confidence within hours of episode 53 ending that episode 54 is probably coming. I want to be precise about exactly what record was and wasn't broken here, because I think the honest, complete picture is actually more interesting than an oversimplified version would be. Kilauea's Puʻuʻōʻō eruption, the one whose early fountaining record just got broken, didn't actually end after that initial 1983 to 1986 fountaining phase. It continued in various different eruptive styles for a total of 35 years, finally ending in 2018, and across that entire multi-decade run, it produced 61 total numbered eruptive episodes, not just the 47 fountaining ones from its opening years. So the current summit eruption has now broken the specific record for the most fountaining episodes produced during any single Kilauea eruption, a genuinely significant 40-year-old benchmark. It has not yet broken the all-time record for total numbered episodes across a full eruption's entire lifespan, since Puʻuʻōʻō's complete run still holds that broader title with 61. Whether the current eruption eventually challenges that larger number too depends entirely on how much longer this episodic pattern continues, which, as of today, shows no clear sign of winding down. Let's talk honestly about what this eruption actually looks like on the ground, because record-breaking volcanic eruption in Hawaii can sound considerably more alarming than what's actually happening here. This entire eruption has been confined to the Halemaumau crater at Kilauea's summit, well within the boundaries of Hawaiʻi volcanoes. National Park, and it has not threatened homes, roads, or communities the way the catastrophic 2018 Lower East Rift Zone eruption did, when lava flows destroyed hundreds of structures in the Leilani Estates and Puna communities. This is a genuinely different kind of eruption, contained within an existing crater, with the primary hazards being volcanic gas, particularly sulfur dioxide, elevated tephra fallout in the immediate summit area, and reduced visibility for drivers navigating the park roads during active fountaining, rather than lava flows advancing toward populated areas. That's exactly why this eruption has become such a popular, genuinely safe public spectacle, with designated viewing areas at Wekahuna, Kupanai Pali, also known as Waldron's Ledge, and Kinakakoi Overlook, the latter reachable via a half-mile walk from the parking area along Crater Rim Drive, drawing visitors who specifically plan trips around catching an active episode in person. That said, the hazards that do exist here are genuinely real and worth respecting rather than dismissing. The Hawaiian volcano observatory has repeatedly noted elevated gas levels and tephra, fine glass particles capable of irritating skin and eyes, present in and downwind of the eruption during active episodes, and has specifically warned visitors to exercise caution while driving in the area, given how dramatically visibility can drop during an active fountaining episode. Wind direction plays a significant role in exactly who experiences these effects on any given day, since low-level winds tend to carry most tephra in one direction, while higher altitude winds can carry lighter particles considerably further and in a completely different direction, occasionally dusting areas well outside the immediate summit region. So why has this specific eruption managed to sustain itself for this long, through 53 episodes and counting over roughly a year and a half, without any clear sign of the underlying magma supply running dry? That's honestly one of the more genuinely open scientific questions researchers are continuing to study in real time as this eruption continues. What we do know is that the deep magma system feeding Kīlauea's summit has continued reliably delivering fresh, gas-rich magma to the shallow reservoir beneath Halemaumau episode after episode, without the kind of clear tapering off pattern that would typically signal an eruption winding toward its conclusion. Comparing this to Puʻuʻōʻo's own history offers a useful, if imperfect, precedent that earlier eruption's opening fountaining phase eventually did transition into a different, more sustained style of activity, a long-lived lava flow rather than repeated dramatic fountaining, and it went on to continue in one form or another for over 3 decades total. Whether the current summit eruption eventually follows a similar long-term trajectory, transitions into some different eruptive style, or simply continues producing fountaining episodes indefinitely at its current roughly 11-day average pace, isn't something scientists can currently predict with real confidence. What they can say, based on the immediate deflation to inflation signal following episode 53, is that the system shows every indication of remaining active for at least the near-term future. If you're planning a trip to the Big Island and specifically hoping to see this eruption in person, here's what actually matters. First, check the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory's daily volcano update directly before you go, since it provides the current alert level and states plainly whether the summit is actively fountaining or paused between episodes at that moment. Information that changes on a timescale of days, not something you can reliably plan weeks in advance around. Second, understand that given the roughly 11-day average gap between episodes, and given that most individual episodes last under 12 hours, the statistically likely outcome on any single day of a typical week-long visit is that you'll catch the summit in a paused state rather than mid-eruption. So build flexibility into your plans rather than counting on witnessing an active episode on a fixed schedule. Third, if you do catch an active episode, stick to the designated public viewing areas, specifically maintained for this purpose, Wekahuna, Kupenai-Pali, and Keanakakoi, since park officials have specifically engineered these locations to offer genuinely spectacular views while keeping visitors at a safe distance from the actual hazards. And fourth, if you have any respiratory sensitivity or asthma, pay attention to volcanic gas advisories specifically, since sulfur dioxide levels can spike noticeably downwind of an active episode even at viewing distances that are otherwise perfectly safe from a direct hazard standpoint. So here's where this remarkable eruption actually stands as of today. Kilauea's ongoing summit eruption, which began at Halemaumau on December 23, 2024, has now produced 53 distinct fountaining episodes, having broken, back on June 1st of this year, a record for the most fountaining episodes in any single Kilauea eruption that had stood since the opening years of the Puʻuʻōʻō eruption between 1983 and 1986, roughly 40 years earlier. The most recent episode, number 53, ran for nearly 10 hours just yesterday, ending abruptly early this morning, and the immediate shift from ground deflation to inflation that followed strongly suggests episode 54 is already building toward its own eventual start. Through it all, this eruption has remained safely contained within Halemaumau crater, drawing scientists and visitors alike to watch one of the most sustained, genuinely record-setting displays of episodic volcanic activity Hawaiʻi has produced in living memory, with no clear sign yet of when or whether this remarkable run is actually going to end. I'll be watching for episode 54 and tracking how much further this eruption's episode count climbs in the weeks ahead. If breakdowns like this help you actually understand the real science and real record behind a headline like this one, rather than just the dramatic footage, subscribe. Because I'll have the update the moment this pattern meaningfully shifts. I'll see you in the next one.